Hello, Alex here, and today we're going to talk about my first roll of Adox's Colour Mission 200 film, which I mostly shot in the Canon P. Let's get into it. Colour film production is one of the most sophisticated challenges in photo manufacturing. This has been the ultimate goal since the beginnings of the new Adox. This is the tagline from Adox, who call this new film an ISO 200 C41 film with a purpose. Adox are working to bring out new, legitimately original emulsions in 35mm and 120. This initial production run was limited to 2,000 rolls and sold out in about 6 hours on Photo Impex the day it was released, which is absolutely crazy. Adox say that sales of this film will go directly into funding more colour film development. This is a color negative film designed for development in the standard C41 chemical process. C41 development yields negatives which have to be inverted either during the scanning or printing process to yield your final positive image. It has a rated ISO of 200, more on that later, and each roll contains 36 exposures, though they are not DX coded, so your camera will not be automatically able to detect that. Canisters are not boxed and are sold individually in these little plastic containers with a nice secure lid. I shot this roll of film on a bright sunny day as part of one of the monthly Ireland analog walks down in Killiney. I had originally planned to shoot this roll on the Canon EOS 1V with the 85mm f1.4, and I did for a little while, but just 4 frames in, the batteries died. Thankfully, my friend Tom was kind enough to let me use his battery from his own EOS camera to rewind the film so that I could load it into a different camera. And then Mark Nolan was kind enough to allow me to use his Canon P rangefinder to finish off the roll because we had barely even started when the batteries in the 1V died. So I shot almost all of these images on a Canon P with a Jupiter 8 50mm f2, mostly either at f2 or f8, I didn't really shoot in between, and using his hot shoe light meter. Framing is a bit off for quite a few of these shots because I'm not used to such a high magnification rangefinder. That viewfinder is about 1x, so it's perfect for a 50mm lens, but there's no parallax correction, or if there is, I didn't know how to enable it, and it's a much tighter field of view than what I'm used to with the Hasselblad X-Pan. So parallax is a lot more of an issue, and so my composition is just terrible in a lot of these shots for that reason. But c'est la vie. We make mistakes and we learn from them. I had the film developed by the folks at John Gunn Cameras, then scanned it myself using the 1DX Mark III, inverted the scans using Negative Lab Pro, and finished processing them in Adobe Lightroom. The single biggest thing is that this film is extremely easy to color grade. Most of these images just have +10 saturation, +5 contrast, a very weak S-curve, some clarity and texture, my basics preset that I apply to absolutely everything in Lightroom. Even then, most of those that did need some correction are mostly just a little bit, like 1 tick or half a tick on the white balance and tint sliders. That's it. I think there were only 2 images where I actually needed any real color grading. Overall, this film is extremely easy to work with in post. On a similar note, the colors are pleasing. You get the warmth and natural skin tones, white Irish skin tones of Kodak film, but you also get the punchy but not over the top greens of Fujifilm. It's this weird intermediary. The colors are just very pleasing overall. There's not much I can say about that. They look good and you don't really need to do much to get them looking good. When you underexpose it, like any color negative film, it becomes very grainy. However, those grainy regions do not go quite as green as a normal color negative film would. We've all seen pictures taken with point and shoots at parties where the flash didn't pop and it's just a swath of green haze. You don't really get that. It goes a bit more blue or even desaturated towards gray somewhat, rather than that kind of pukey green color. So although it will punish you with more grain if you do underexpose it, it is a bit more palatable than other color negative films in that regard. Resolution and sharpness are pretty good. Like I said, I did get 4 frames off with the Canon 1V and the 85 f1.4, which is probably the sharpest lens I've ever used, and that is a very, very good benchmark for quality. It shows that the film can resolve quite a lot of detail. It is definitely a consumer film, it's not competing with Portra or Provia, but it is able to resolve quite a bit more detail than your average consumer films like Kodak Gold, Fuji C200, that kind of thing. I would say it's somewhere in the ballpark of Kodak's Ultramax in terms of resolution, which is personally my favorite consumer grade film. Although this won't be for everyone, which is why I'm putting it last in the pros, I really like this. It gives very mild and gentle halations under certain lighting conditions. I didn't really find a trend as to what causes it, apart from just bright points of light, which you expect, but you get these subtle red halations in parts of your image, and I just think that looks really nice. It's just a cherry on top of your frame without being completely over the top like you see with a lot of Cinestill 800T photography. And I'm not talking about people in general, I'm guilty of that as well. Although the film is rated at ISO 200, it's probably more like an ISO 160 or 125 film. It is quite grainy at 200, and Patrick did some testing and found that when you overexpose it just a little bit, it cleans up quite a lot. So similar to the T-Max 3200 and Delta 3200 films, the rated film speed and the true technical ISO in terms of densitometry are probably a little bit different. However, we're talking a third of a stop to a half of a stop. It's not a big deal. Although I was unfamiliar with this camera, it being my first time using it, and I have not used a hot shoe light meter before, I still think I was relatively on the ball with my exposure. However, a couple of shots came out grossly overexposed because of the slow nature of focusing with a rangefinder, or at least one you're not used to, and using a hot shoe light meter rather than something through the lens or in the viewfinder. You know, lighting scenes change, clouds come and go, so there are a couple of shots where the exposure is just completely blown out by probably 2 stops, but that would still be within the usable dynamic range of a lot of other color negative films, but it just kind of falls apart in some shots with this film, such as this one here of Gavin. At €12 a pop, it isn't exactly cheap. But then at the same time, gone are the days of €4 Color Plus. I mean, consumer films about €10 a roll in this part of the world at the moment, so an extra €2 over Gold or C200 to get these colors and this general look, it's worth it compared to them, but €12 a roll is still a lot of money. So now, time for our deep dive into my 3 favorite pictures from this roll. This is my 3rd favorite picture from the roll, and it's pretty simple. We have nice clouds in the sky, a decent range of colors from the deep reddish browns in the trees, the green and yellows and oranges in the foliage to the blue sky itself. There's a little bit of a glow around the castle, which just works really nicely. This was quite a heavy crop because 50mm doesn't really work for a castle that's a quarter mile away, but it's a simple composition. I wish there was a bit more texture in the sky, but I like it. It's simple. Next, we have Alfie, David's dog who attends some of the Ireland analog walks, aka our own Baxter. I shot this with the 1V and the 85 1.4, and it's just a really nice picture of Alfie. The oranges and yellows came out quite nicely. I did need a little bit of color correction here to bring the oranges back from that yellowish green more towards red, but it was like -10 in the color sliders. It's not a huge change. There is good sharpness. The depth of field it isolates Alfie from the fairly neutral background pretty well. I know it's a bit orange teal, but it's just a nice color palette. It's a nice dog who is a good boy on the beach having fun. My favorite picture from the roll is this portrait of Mark. This is the Mark who loaned me his Canon P. It's just a really nice, simple 85mm portrait. And yes, my 2 favorite pictures from the roll were taken on the 1V, not the Canon P, but nevertheless, This is a very, very nice picture and I'm very happy with how it came out. Wide open at f1.4, nice punchy light and contrast, but not too harsh lighting. The colors are vibrant, but not ridiculous like something like Ektar. The tonal gradients in his skin and his jacket, it just works really nicely. The only thing I can see that is distinctly wrong or less than ideal is that bit of hill that you can see in the background. I wish I would have just taken a step or two to the left and framed that out, but I was just enjoying myself taking pictures of friends. In conclusion, it's a high quality, albeit consumer grade film with good colors, an easy post-processing workflow, good resolution but not mind-blowing, tolerable grain, decent tolerance for underexposure, not so much for overexposure, which is a little bit out of whack for color negative films, and a little bit of halation just to spice up your images, just a small amount. Normally I would say whether or not I recommend a film, but I'm not going to make a comment on that at the moment because we don't know if we're going to get a second batch of this film. For all we know, these are the only rolls that are going to be produced of this specific emulsion before Adox use their money to produce something else entirely. Screw it. If it does come out again, I would say give it a go. It seems to marry the best of both worlds from both the Kodak and the Fuji sides of the color spectrum, and it's just really nice. I like it and I think it's worth a try, if you can get some. So that's going to be it for this video on my first roll of Adox's Colour Mission 200 color negative film, which I shot in Mark's Canon P. Thank you so much again, Mark, for letting me borrow your camera, and I guess you can have the X-Pan sometime. Call it quits. For the rest of you, stay safe, and bye-bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Chaka1277 for new pictures every single day. If you enjoy this video and like what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon where the tiers start at just €1 per month.